Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Sarabeth Shuck's Academic Partners presentation. It's a delight to see everybody today. Mess around with this too much, Sarabeth. We don't want to have the microphone fiasco at the start of things here. We need so much talk. It's a pleasure to introduce Sarabeth to you and her work. I first met Sarabeth, I don't know how many years ago. It would be at least 4 or 5 years ago, when her family came from Colorado on a campus tour, and they wanted to have lunch with, I don't know in what capacity I was there having lunch with me, but I was delighted to be there. It was great. Her brother Ben also was there, who's now a sophomore, somewhere here. Yes, that's next to mom. So Sarabeth came into the honors program the following year, and as everybody who's had her in class knows, she is just simply a delight to have in class. She sits there completely prepared, engaged moment by moment, offering keen insights in a way that makes the class better. And so I'm always delighted. I've been delighted anytime Sarabeth is in class, and when she asked me to work with her on this project, it was a nice culminating point. So Sarabeth is a major in English. She has also spent significant time studying biology here, although not physics, as her friends needle her about. I've had first-hand exposure to this in the Academic Partners program this year. But she is very capacious intellectually, and she has brought together all kinds of fields in this work, which she'll be talking to us about, on Tolkien and the place of music in his narratives as he writes in The Lord of the Rings. So she'll be working in literature, literary theory, theology, philosophy, and I think we're in for something that's going to take us into some really beautiful places. So let's welcome Sarabeth.
In western lands beneath the sun, the flowers may rise in spring. The trees may bud, the waters run, the merry finches sing. Or there maybe 'tis cloudless night, and swaying beaches bare, the elven stars as jewels white amid their branching hair. Though here at journey's end I lie, in darkness very deep, beyond all towers strong and high, beyond all mountains steep, above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. In the climactic chapters of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy, hobbits Frodo and Sam find themselves in Mordor, land of darkness and the dwelling place of Sauron. Separated from their fellowship, they creep toward Mount Doom, on a quest to destroy the One Ring on which the fate of Middle-earth rests. An injured Frodo has been captured by orcs. Sam, who has thankfully managed to transfer possession of the ring to himself, crouches beneath the tower attic where Frodo lies. Both feel utterly alone, and it seems all is lost. How can Sam possibly carry the ring to the furnaces of Mount Doom, alone, without getting killed? Despair closes around the ever-faithful Sam, so he begins to sing songs from his Shire homeland, turning to the powerful strength of music. And the music that has grown in him during his long journey, born of his admiration of the elves, becomes a new song, a song of his very own that has words born from a deep familiarity with the old stories of Middle-earth, in the acute emotion of his dire circumstances. In this song, Sam reminds himself of what is good by lingering on a picture of the western lands where he lives and beyond where the elves live. Then he finds strength in his song by reminding himself that no matter how bleak his circumstances are, the sun and stars still shine, and darkness cannot ultimately snuff them out. So begins my research paper this semester, and a year ago I knew I wanted to do something either with story or with music, and somehow with Tolkien I've managed to do both. And the title I had to write 3 months ago kind of encompasses it, the idea of myth and music. But I think more fully, a sort of thesis for it would be that through my research I have looked at story through music, and I've called this musical narrative. And I've used the frameworks of medieval cosmology, C.S. Lewis, the biblical Psalms, and the reality of Christ's incarnation to explore these songs in Tolkien's trilogy. So back to Sam and his song that I quoted at the beginning. His song can be seen as a pinnacle of the songs that cover the pages of the trilogy. Anyone who has read Tolkien's work knows that everything from jolly hobbit rhymes to deeply sorrowful elegies, from traveling songs to battle calls, cover the pages. And I think it's rather easy to skip over some of these. I certainly did it myself the first time I read through it. It's hard to understand exactly the whole purpose of the songs. But as I've studied them, they actually have so much significance. Tolkien's biographer said that his most profound feelings were expressed through poetry, and these songs are poetry. And if you think about it, the power of poetry resides in the way and how it can capture a facet of reality through language. And the full essence of the poetry is not just in the words themselves that you're reading, but also in what is read between the lines and in what is felt and experienced in the reading of those words. And this is why poetry can be more powerful than prose, and how poetry put to music can be more powerful than poetry alone. And in this paper, I explore how musical poetry, so songs with words, marry two mediums of communication, the words themselves as well as the melody of the music. And this double communication renders it a very powerful form of art. Before I go any further, I want to note that although my main focus is Tolkien in this paper, I've also used a lot of Lewis quotes, looked at a lot of his work as well, because both of them are from the same Oxford intellectual tradition. They run in the same group of friends, critiquing each other's work, and all of that. So they have their differences, but they also have so much similarity in the way they view the world. So it's helpful to look at both. So in order to understand where Tolkien is coming from in his music, we first have to understand story and myth. And this is very much connected to that first mode of musical communication, language. And because we are made in God's image, we do things like God, as in God speaks, and so we speak and use language. God writes stories, as in the great story of redemption of Scripture, and we write stories. And this is closely tied to Tolkien's idea of the fairy story, which is more than just like a Grimm's fairy tale sort of deal. For Tolkien, the fairy realm and fairy stories take reality to the extreme. So you have the joys are the greatest of joys, and sufferings are the greatest of sufferings, and the villains are larger than life. And it helps us to see reality from a different perspective. And for him, the story of the gospel is the ultimate fairy tale. As in, Jesus was at the cross, Jesus experienced the greatest suffering of mankind. And then it went to extreme joy on the other hand, his resurrection. And for Tolkien, the best stories reflect this glorious jump from extreme suffering to extreme joy. And he calls this the eucatastrophe. And even in his own work, he portrays this. As in, like at the end of the trilogy, we have, it seems like all things are coming to an end. Defeat seems certain. Frodo and Sam have little chance of getting to Mount Doom to throw the ring in the furnace. The armies are gathered outside of the gates of Mordor. They're so small compared to it. And then, beyond all hope, they're able to get rid of the ring. And the eagles find Sam and Frodo, and the armies win, and peace comes to Middle-earth. So Tolkien's ending gives us a framework for better understanding the victory of the gospel. And for Tolkien and Lewis, this is also tied to the idea of myth. And for them, myth mediates between the primary world, which is our world, and the secondary world, which is the fairy world. And Tolkien says, myths have the inner consistency of reality, and the myths woven by us, though they contain error, will also reflect the fragment of the true light, the eternal truth that is with God. And the myth is a lens that illuminates how the world works, because it reflects the truth of reality back to us. We see in a myth, we see a story that is stripped of familiarity. It's a different setting, a different world, a fairy world. And that means that we can, in some ways, we're able to see reality more clearly, our own reality more clearly. It's kind of like this quote from Lewis that says, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because I see everything else by it. So for Lewis, he sees the world through Christianity. In a similar way, you can see the world through myth. It helps us to see the reality of how our world works. And finally, in this section on language and words and story, I want to make a difference in the words fact and truth. This is something I very much enjoyed considering this semester. And I don't think it's just a matter of semantics. I think it actually helps us understand two different parts of reality better. And the idea is that myths can be factually true, they may not be factually true, as in they may not have actually happened. No one thinks that the events of the Lord of the Rings actually happened, or that the Chronicles of Narnia actually happened, things like that. But they can have truth and be true in the sense that they portray an aspect of reality that is always true. For example, in the Chronicles of Narnia, looking at how Edmund is redeemed by Aslan, we learn how redemption works, and how redemption works in that world is the same as in our world. And I believe it is this sort of truth beyond facts that music helps us enter and grasp. The second part of the two different communications, the first part was language and story, and the second part was the melody, the music itself. We kind of have to take a couple of what might seem like rabbit trails, but actually are connected. Because Tolkien would have been very familiar with medieval cosmology as an Oxford scholar, and that has a lot of things to do with music. But in order to talk about their perspective on music, we first have to start with the ancient Greeks and go back quite a ways. So, in the 5th century BC, Plato was writing about music, and he believed that music was linked to morality. So for him, certain kinds of music inspire virtue, and other kinds inspire weakness, or cause people to be weak. And he said that good music should balance the soul and bring someone closer to the ideal. And there was an extreme focus for him on the rational, mathematical aspect of music. And he was very concerned with the emotional side of music and the power of that. Centuries later, Augustine, in the 300s AD, who was Christian, he was also concerned with the emotional power of music and had a suspicion of the full goodness of creative matter. I think this could have partially been due to his sinful choices before he became a Christian, but he was also wrestling with this idea of how the physical world can be good. And then in the 5th century AD, we have Boethius, and from my understanding, he was one of the first to have the idea of merging this best of ancient learning, or the best thoughts of that, with a Christian perspective. Like trying to find a common grace that the ancients would have had, and bringing that into Christianity to create a fullness of thought. And this had great influence on the medieval church, as people throughout, as they created the medieval cosmology, if you're thinking about it, they definitely had this idea of drawing from all that had been in creating their cosmology. So the three that I've just talked about all share skepticism of this goodness of the physical world. And as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of Ecclesiastes, that and throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, the author looks at the vanity of the world and sees that all is vain. But then at the end, he comes to the conclusion that we are to fear God and keep his commandments. But there's also various verses throughout that talk about enjoying the life that God has given. Like if God has given you a blessing, enjoy it. Enjoy the things that God has created for man, for himself, but that man can use. And I believe we can glorify God by delighting in the physical gifts that he gives us, because they often point toward a greater reality. And it is a good reminder that we're not just purely spiritual beings. We are body and soul, which are definitely intertwined and connected. And when Jesus returns at the second coming, our bodies and souls are going to be gloriously reunited. So clearly God is not opposed to the physical world. And I would say in response to these musical thinkers, music is a gift from God, and it is no accident that it emotionally tugs at us. This is the way that God has created it to be. But like any other blessing, it can be used for good or for ill. But it is a powerful merging of narrative and melody as a way of understanding the holiness of God and a greater reality. So back to medieval cosmology. To give a little bit of a very brief summary of what the basic part of medieval cosmology was, they had a geocentric view of the solar system, as in the Earth is at the center. And I think for a long time I used to think, well, that's kind of a little bit of a selfish way of looking at it, like, oh man, it's so great, we're at the center. But they had a different view because of Earth being at the center, they actually, in some ways, had a better understanding of the depravity of man, and they were trying to portray that. One author, who has studied this significantly, says, an explanation of a little bit of how the universe and the heavens looked like to them. She says, Earth sits at the center, surrounded by these spheres, one atop the other. Each sphere is governed by a planet, our planets, which is fixed within each sphere. Beyond all this is the Empyrean, the abode of God. The medievals believed that only the created order beneath the moon has been affected by the fall. Everything above the moon's sphere is perfect and unfallen, still singing the praises of the Lord as it has its creation. But while the heavens are full of dancing and the music of the spheres, beneath the moon all is silent. I think what's important to remember is that they're looking at this from a mythically true sense, as in, they may or may not have thought that is exactly what actually is in the heavens, but it was a way of looking at the world and considering God and our place in the world. And it's helpful to remember that they have a very orderly cosmos, but it was also very full of life. And so it brings together reason and imagination with all of the order, but also all of the life. The same author says, I'll quote her to continue with this idea, the medieval cosmos was whirling, sparkling, dazzling, and teeming with life, music, and dance, teeming with personality with a spiritual dimension, which makes the universe not just enchanting, but alive. So, again, if anyone has ever heard of the music of the spheres, this is the idea that the heavens are declaring the glory of God, and that they're singing it with an inaudible music. So now finally we come to Tolkien. And I started this project with several questions, and kind of off the lines of why is there music that moves us? What is it in music that can evoke this longing for an unidentified something? Why, when we're with a group of people huddled around campfires singing songs, why is that bonding? Why does that build community? Why does hearty singing in church vibrate chords of joy deep inside of us? Why do cultures across time create music and rhythms, and why are we drawn to this? What is it beyond just merely being made in the image of God? I wanted to try to get at that, and I've attempted to do that in this paper. And so we have Tolkien, and I believe that Tolkien offers the beginnings of the answers to these questions. So as I said before, songs are cover the pages of his trilogy, but they're also unevenly distributed. There's many more songs in the first part of the trilogy than in the second half, because as Sam and Frodo get closer to Mordor, songs begin to cease almost altogether, with the exception of Sam's song in the tower. And this suggests that to sing and to make music is to be a person who values truth, goodness, and beauty. Likewise, when Frodo is wounded by the Nazgul, he cannot sing until he is healed of its poisonous influence of the wound. And so there's this idea that the music was created by God and that it is good. And this, even in his creation story for Middle-earth, Tolkien has lots of ties to music. So for him, in Silmarillion, which is a collection of really what he loved, I think he loved this, according to his biographers, even more than the actual story themselves, just coming with all the legends and the backstory, the reason Middle-earth was the way it was. But in his creation story, he talks about Eru, the supreme god, and of Middle-earth, and the Ainur, who are angel-like beings, and Eru has the Ainur sing the world into existence. And evil and sin enters the world through one of the fallen Ainur singing dissonantly with and against the grand theme of Eru. But what's really neat is that Eru tells Melkor, yeah, you can sing dissonantly, but really I'm the one who created the music, and you can't ever, I'm the one who even created this thing, and so you can't ever go beyond the bounds that I have set for it. And there are similar, in the Chronicles of Narnia, there's a very similar singing creation into being sort of story in The Magician's Nephew. So now I studied some of what Tolkien's view on stories was, and in one of his letters he said that there's a scene in The Two Towers, I think, where Sam and Frodo are discussing stories, and he said that this is one of his favorite scenes of the book, and it really helped get his ideas down on stories. And in this scene, Sam and Frodo are talking, and Sam talks about his disillusioned perspective on adventures, He says that stories seem to be sprung upon ordinary people, and that the only reason we remember them is because the people kept going even when it was hard. And he recognizes that many times the stories don't end well, but we remember them because the people were faithful. And the hobbits keep talking, and then they recall the story of Beren, who was a legendary figure in Middle-earth. And Sam says, Beren now, he never thought he was going to get that silver oak and the Iron Crown, and yet he did. And that was a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And why, sir, I never thought of that before. You've got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? No, they never end as tales, said Frodo, but the people in them come and go when their parts ended. Our part will end later or sooner. But Sam and Frodo find hope in this thought that their story will encourage future generations, just like Beren's story has encouraged them. And what's really neat, and to tie it back to music, is that the only reason I think Sam would know this story of Beren is because Aragorn sang it for them earlier on in the trilogy. And he's likely thinking back to that scene, or to that time when he was singing it. And this whole conversation suggests that worthy stories and powerful songs are intricately linked. Another idea of a song that is throughout the trilogy is the idea of making an end worthy of song. There are many characters that express this desire, and I think the two most prominent ones are King Theoden at Helm's Deep and the writers who go through the paths of the dead. So King Theoden says, "The world changes, and all that once was strong now proves unsure. How shall any tower withstand such numbers and such reckless hate? The end will not be long, but I will not end here, taken like an old badger in a trap. When dawn comes, I will bid men sound Helm's horn, and I will ride forth. Will you ride with me then, son of Arathorn? Maybe we shall clear the road or make such an end as will be worth a song, if any be left to sing of us hereafter." And then, after Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli ride through the paths of the dead, Legolas says, "Follow it may, great deeds are not lessened in worth. Great deed was the riding of the paths of the dead, and great it shall remain, then none be left in Gondor to sing of it, in the days that are to come." So what is it about these stories that makes them worthy of being remembered through song? I think it's helpful to think how stories would have been used in Middle-earth. So as in our own Anglo-Saxon times, tales would have been told around great roaring fires in times of peace, and bards would have sung the stories. But Tolkien also shows us that tales in Middle-earth are often told to encourage others in trial. And to make an end worthy of song and to desire that end is not a selfish end. Rather, it is to desire an end that will encourage future generations when they are in trial. And with Theoden and Helm's Deep, him acting on the desire to make an end worthy of song, even though he did not. I don't know if he actually died or not. I can't remember. I know he dies at some point. But at that point, it resulted in the preservation of a righteous outpost, and ultimately a step forward in the overthrow of Sauron. The paths of the dead resulted in many captives being released, and others joining the fight for good. This is the idea that great courage inspires and begets further courage. And the Middle-earth songs are the primary conveyors of this process. So then we come back to Sam. Sam, the one who sung the song I read at the beginning. And he's the character in the whole trilogy that's the most attuned to the idea of stories and music. He's often meditating on it, thinking about it, giving his ideas to Frodo, very humbly. And at one point, early on in the trilogy, after he sees the elves in the Shire, he says to Frodo, "It was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean." And Sam has a deep respect for the elves, who sing songs based on old stories and old truth, suggesting that there's a connection between mythical truth and musical narrative. And when Frodo and Sam talk to Faramir, they learn that there has been division between men and elves because of the arts of the enemy. Sauron wants men to forget the deep truth of the world, so he seeks to separate regular folk from those who remember the truth that sustains and guides them. And Sam helps us apply this idea that the elves represent by intuitively knowing who has a life worthy of song. And often characters in the trilogy will take the name of somebody whose life has been worthy of song, and they'll call upon it, not as a call as if to a god or something, but kind of as a call to goodness and to truth. And Sam says this of Galadriel, the Elven Queen: "I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir, lovely, sometimes like a great tree in flower, sometimes like a white daffodil lily, hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost and stars. But that's a lot of nonsense, and I'll write it my mark." So Sam is he's using these metaphors. He can't quite get at it because he realizes that you need to have poetry and song to really begin to express what he's feeling. But for him, Galadriel represents all that is good, true, and beautiful, and the memory of her causes Sam to rejoice in these qualities. And this suggests that a worthy song seeks to inspire true goodness and beauty in the listeners. And the metaphors and analogies he uses grasp at something greater, something deeper, something at the combination of words and music, something that it does to bring the listener closer to mythic truth. Like Plato, Sam believes worthy song cultivates virtue. But unlike Plato, Sam seems to root this ability in both the nonverbal reading between the notes, the experience of the music, as well as the virtue-inducing power of the music's mathematical orderliness. And we see, when Frodo and Sam are fighting Shelob, the big spider, we see this kind of in action. Because Frodo, as he's trying to face Shelob, he calls out Galadriel, and he's holding her feel aloft. And again, it's his representation of goodness. He's calling on the memory of goodness. And the reason he even knows anything about Galadriel is mostly because of songs and legends and the stories. He did meet her, but a lot of it was hearing it from other people through the songs. And this memory of goodness moves him to act courageously. So, there's a lot more of my paper. I was trying to decide what to speak on. A few weeks ago, many of you may have been at Dr. Kikasola's lecture on music and silence. I very much enjoyed this lecture. And there were many interesting and fascinating things he talked about. But one idea that I particularly found helpful for this paper was the way he talked about the perceived silence of God during trials and how God answers in those times and how that is connected to music. And for him, this answer to perceived silence is either and deliverance and incarnation. So the idea of deliverance being after the Exodus, there's 400 years of slavery, and God delivers the people of Israel. And after 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament, we have the incarnation of Christ. And the way this connects back to Tolkien for me is that as I've talked about, many of Tolkien's songs are songs in times of trial, used to strengthen people. They're in times of trouble, and kind of this time of perceived silence. It seems like they're not sure what's going to happen, what's going on. And so, kind of with all those ideas together, I think of these narrative songs, this musical narrative, that respond to trials, they can offer incarnational hope, because in a sense, songs are a small incarnation as they bring words and melodic meaning together in a new way. And this all becomes a continuous loop. Songs are small incarnations that reflect the ultimate redemption made possible, that can reflect the ultimate redemption made possible by the incarnation of Christ. Yet Christ's incarnation is the reason that we can even sing songs that can possibly strengthen. And so without this greater reality of Christ's incarnation, any attempt to mirror that would be futile. So do you remember the questions I asked at the beginning, or at some point 2 minutes ago? I feel like, or through my research, I believe that the fullness of Tolkien's worldview, his music, his philology, his faith, can powerfully together this idea of songs as incarnation, indicators of a greater reality. The unidentified something that music makes us long for is our longing for the fullness of God's presence made possible through Christ's incarnation. And music forms community because it gets at that which ties us together as image bearers, the desire to attain the reality we can only reflect here on earth. In singing in community, we have this possibility of spurring one another on to live virtuous lives and making us strengthened by the hope of future joy. And I realized through all this research, it is really hard to pin down exactly what music does. And in some ways, I'm happy with what I've written. In other ways, I feel like I still don't really know. And so I think ultimately this paper only scratches at the surface of the role of music and what it can do. And I also have been considering that I believe stating exactly what music is a form of reduction, because the language available to us on earth can't express the full essence of what it is about music, what we intuit about music. But there is hope, because Christ is the Word, and through the incarnation he is both the full essence of God and also the Word contained in human form. And perhaps in the new heavens and new earth, humanity's glorified ability to use language will result in the ability to more fully explain what music does. And for now, we can pursue living faithful lives that are worthy of song. So as I close, I wanted to mention that Tolkien originally had a different ending for his story. His original ending had to do it describes Sam surrounded by his children, telling them stories, telling them the story of the ring, and his children are excited and they're inspired toward virtue, and it's a very sweet ending. The different versions of the epilogue, and with him and his wife Rosie remembering the hope she inexplicably felt the day the ring was thrown into the furnace of its making. Far away, she didn't know what was happening, but she felt the hope. And unfortunately, as heartwarming as this is, many critics felt the ending didn't quite fit, and so the ending remains as we know it today, with Frodo leaving for the Grey Havens and his companions returning home to enjoy life and a redeemed Middle-earth. Yet the fact remains that Tolkien struggled to know how to end the story. He didn't even really love the ending that stays, because he still felt like he needed to have something with Sam's children. So he was wrestling. I think he was probably wrestling with this idea of, do I end with stories, do I end with maybe song? And I think it seems like he might have decided to end in song because of this a phrase in these last few sentences. At last, the three companions, Mrs. Sam, Merry, and Pippin, the hobbits, turned away, and never again looking back, they rode slowly homewards, and they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire. But each had great comfort in his friends on the long grey road. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland. And already they were singing again as they went. The trilogy may not end with the fulfillment of Sam's storytelling, but it does end in singing. And that is no accident, but rather a final hearkening to the healing, empowering, incarnational nature of music. Thank you for listening.
All right, we have some time for questions, so please feel free to direct them. Sarabeth.
Do you know if Tolkien ever actually put any of the songs to music? Because I know a lot of other people have taken the songs and put them. Did he ever give any indication of how that would work?
I don't think he ever wrote music for it himself. I'm recalling somewhere in his letters or his biography or somewhere where he said people who can actually write the notes are wizards. I know there's a number of other people that have, and I've listened to those and enjoyed them. But I think his love was a little bit more in the words, but there's connection between the two. Yes.
Could you explain a little bit more on how the geocentric model it wasn't a selfish model of the universe or the cosmology, but rather showed the totality of
Mm-hmm. So the geocentric model, it's so if anyone's heard of Copernicus and Galileo, Copernicus was the one who originally suggested the heliocentric model of the universe. And Galileo was the one who, I think, who invented the telescope, and he confirmed his ideas. And then, when they were suggesting those things, I think in the 1500s, the church was not happy with that, because it felt like an attack on their mythology and on how they viewed the world. And I'd love to do more research on this, but it seems like you can almost believe both at the same time. Like you can have this mythical cosmology view, perhaps, and that helps you better understand our place in the world as humans and who God is. And also, you can more the scientific side of it, that this is, as we know, this is how the planets actually physically are and where they are physically. So, and it wasn't, their idea of the Earth being centered was not selfish, because they believed that at the bottom was, they almost thought it was at the bottom. As if some authors have said it looks like a cathedral. It said like looking up at a cathedral and you're at the bottom, because Earth is at the bottom. You look up into the heavens and see the glory of God. Yes, Dr. Hughes.
Just to sort of follow up on what you just said, if you think about it, the creation narrative is a geocentric narrative. I mean, it's geocentric, right? How the Earth was made.
Yes, yes.
So I think too that sort of is a response to this notion of also how we're self-centered and terror-centric and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite biblical.
That's true, I didn't even think about that.
And
I
so
like that.
how you can believe both things, as you were saying, you can look at science, but you can also look at the narrative, the narrative,
Yeah,
okay?
yes.
Do you know differences between the songs of the different races of Middle-earth and how they each have their own reflections of what Tolkien's main musical picture was?
I started looking at some of that. The way I saw, and I would like to study more about what Tolkien thought of elves and what his elves were supposed to represent, because in some ways it almost seems like they're unfallen. There was a phrase somewhere that I read that was like that. It seems like they draw more on the very old stories, like the stories that tell how the world works. And then people like the men of Rohan, their songs are more like, this is what happened. The kinds of songs that you would remember and encourage one another by. But the elves are the ones who talk about the legends and like who all of Middle-earth is. And that's about as far as I know of that. Yes, Dr. Newman?
As you were examining the songs in the trilogy, do you have a favorite?
I do like the one that Sam quotes. And just like seen in the context of everything, the idea that like he's in darkness, but he's remembering the songs of his people, and he can find hope in that. Dr. Kizel.
I'm curious if you've noticed any noticeable or interesting differences between Lewis's notion of Lewis's cosmology of music and Tolkien's cosmology of music. The scholars have noticed creation of Middle-earth is very improvisatory. Both Narnia and Middle-earth are created in music, true music, but it's different accounts. So, I don't know, anything you noticed or... It's not a gotcha, I really don't know. So.
I didn't look specifically so much the differences. I was mainly looking at where they were the same, just kind of the overall idea of the singing. Some of my main ideas and differences in general between Tolkien and Lewis are the allegory versus just writing a story sort of thing. But that would be interesting to look into. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. Yes.
Do I remember correctly that in Narnia, it's Aslan who sings the word into existence?
Yes.
And so the Christ figure, it's more sort of biblical in the sense of the word, although not spoken, but sung into existence, that is kind of what you're saying. It's interesting when in the Silmarillion, Eru says to the Einar, okay, here's my purpose now, you do it. And that's your improvisational thing, but it's not just, oh, well, what I feel like doing. Each of them has a thought about reality that they sing into existence. And that to me is a beautiful kind of comparison, you know.
Yeah.
You think of the two models, mythical models of creation.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
This was excellent, thank you. I heard a lot about the singing as it affects the singer or the auditor. Out of curiosity, does Tolkien have a sense of the singing affecting the world or the flow of history? Sort of in Lord of the Rings, do songs ever impact someone other than the singer or the hero?
It's an interesting question.
I also don't know the answer, so.
I'm not sure this answers it, but like the idea that the music is so bound up in the world, like to take the music out of the world would not be Middle-earth. I get that sense that it's like the different characters speak of the legends and the songs. It's like this is common knowledge that that we know, that we need to know. So I guess it would not be the same sort of world without the music.
Not to start a conversation, but I think you're onto something. I thought of Tom Bombadil and Old Man Willow. That's proving your point. So, thank you.
He's interesting. He did not quite make it all the way into my paper, but I was definitely looking at his songs and trying to figure out where they fit in.
Are there Peter Jackson's films, are any of these songs actually sung?
That is a very good question. I watched the movies. I did not study them really at all for this.
It's a question for everybody.
If anyone knows, tell me.
The extended first edition, the first movie extended, the Elvis sing part of their song,
Okay.
about Albert.
Okay, that would make sense. Thank you.
When Aragorn sings at the coronation, he sings lines from the book for his coronation.
Okay. Flash home, people have the little facts. Yes.
Actually, the tin is kind of big. The next paper would be citing the cases where the third hearer hears the song being sung. Because even Tom Bombadil's song is not sung to them. They overhear it. He's just out there singing.
That's true.
And there are other situations where the elves are singing, and the hobbits come up and they hear it happening, and then they step into a circle and throw the party. So there are third parties that are not really they're not being sung to, they're overheard. So the overheard singing.
That is interesting. And they always, like Sam, that quote I had about him saying, the singing really got to me. That's when they see the elves first before they're talking to him. And it definitely, I think that's some of what starts Sam trying to figure out this whole song thing throughout the whole trilogy. And toward the end, he sings his own song.
In fact, follow up with that. Harold Best talks about what should the church do. The church ought to just carry on with the worship, and the world will hear, rather than trying to be like the world.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of the things you've said make me think of something that I've never thought of before. And I'm probably not the only one in the room that experienced that. The things you shared about Sam made me wonder if Sam is Tolkien inserting himself in the story, like Galadriel. He wants to come up with a song for Galadriel, and he can't. That's kind of an admission by Tolkien. I really would like to do this, but I can't. And what you just said about Sam moving through the story and reflecting on songs, that's almost the trilogy itself, which is Tolkien's creation. What are your thoughts on that?
I like that. I think in several of his letters, he talks about, he keeps returning to Sam. He had a lot of correspondence with one of his sons while he was writing the trilogy. So he would write little notes like, "Oh, I love this section," or "This part's just not coming along well. I can't figure it out." I think that is very plausible that he sees himself in Sam, or he uses Sam at least to talk about some of his worldview.
Anybody else? One more question? Okay, let's thank Sarabeth again. Thank you for coming out. We have our next academic partners presentation in this very room at 3:15 with Joshua Sangre. So we'll be talking about Joshua. You want to give a preview here? Coming interactions.
We'll be talking about engineering and how engineering goes about making design decisions, specifically with the idea that you need
Okay. 3:15, and then this evening, Parker Chen will be talking about natural theology here too, as well as 7 o'clock. So, all right, thank you, everybody.